wondering, what do I do? Ever feel the same way? Slave to the brave, brave. If you're fake, wave to the true you. If you take me out, please don't forget to take me home. If you take me to a party, don't forget the microphone. If we take my car, then please don't try to touch the radio. Cause the midnight sun is burning, bringing peace into my soul. Shining down on a cloudy day. I know the song's gonna last forever. That's what I say.
Under pressure from liberal critics, we should all apologize. I can't wait until Ginny Thomas calls me and asks me to apologize for even telling you this. Justice Clarence Thomas of the Supreme Court acknowledged in filings released on Monday that he erred by not disclosing his wife's past employment as required by federal law. He's just a Supreme Court judge. Justice Thomas said that in his annual financial disclosure statements over the last 6 years, the employment of his wife, Virginia Thomas, was inadvertently omitted due to a misunderstanding of the filing instructions. Hey, look, who put that pubic hair on a Coke can? That's the way that he distracts people. I'm sorry, I didn't, I inadvertently omitted my wife's employment for the past 6 years by right-wing, basically wingnut welfare, because I got distracted by everything that was on my Coke can. To rectify that situation, Justice Thomas filed 7 pages of an amended disclosures listing Mrs. Thomas's employment in that time with the Heritage Foundation, a conservative policy group, and Hillsdale College in Michigan, for which she ran a constitutional law center in Washington. Those two entities. I wouldn't be surprised if the Heritage Foundation didn't fund Hillsdale College. Frankly, I don't know this for a fact. As I said, I would be surprised to find out. But I would certainly be even more surprised if the person who funds Heritage Foundation was not the same person who also funds Hillsdale College. Just to give you a sense of how closed the loop is on the right. Today, I want you to listen to Hannity and Levin. You don't have to. And see, and frankly, Limbaugh, how many times in a given day their shows do they present advertising for Hillsdale College and for the Heritage Foundation? Hannity does the Heritage Foundation, Limbaugh does the Hillsdale College, and Levin does both. You can get the blah, blah, blah. I can't remember what the name of the newsletter is. That newsletter you can get from Hillsdale College. They'll send you just all the tripe that if you haven't received it in the first, in the glossy format from Heritage Foundation, you can get it from the glossy format from the Hillsdale College. Just all wingnut welfare, man. Do you know how rich I could be right now if this was a right-wing podcast? Do you think I would have to say twice, put up a blog to come up with a name for the post show? First of all, we would have an automated system that when I said that, the system itself would put up the blog. And we wouldn't even have to ask you people, nor would we, because that's not the way the right-wingers work, for suggestions as to the name of the post show, because I would have the money to hire an advertising firm to come up with a clever name.
That's how E4 happened, right?
That's right. That's right.
If you could roll the world with the flip of a switch, would you do it? If you could make everybody poor just so you could be rich? Would you do it?
The justice came under criticism last week from Common Cause, a liberal advocacy group, for failing to disclose Mrs. Thomas' employment as required under the 1978 Ethics in Government Act. Well, that law is 32 years old. How can one be expected to know a law that is 32 years old? Its review of Internal Revenue Service filings show that the Heritage Foundation paid Mrs. Thomas $686,000 from 2003 to 2007. Yeah, it's not bad.
There's a heritage room in the library at Hillsdale College.
Surprise, surprise.
Really? I can't believe it. I'm sure there's a Hillsdale room at the Heritage Foundation, too. And this, of course, is coming on the heels of people asserting that Thomas should have withdrawn from deciding last year's landmark Citizens United case on campaign finance because of both Mrs. Thomas's founding of another conservative political group in 2009 and Justice Thomas's own appearance at a private political retreat organized by Charles Koch, a prominent conservative financier. Justice Thomas and Antonin Scalia said in a statement released by the court on Thursday they had each spoken at dinners at the Koch retreat and that their expenses were paid by the Federalist Society conservative legal group. I mean, come on, folks. People all up in arms because Antonin Scalia went to Michelle Bachman's day camp on the Constitution for Tea Partiers. If you had any inkling that the Supreme Court was not tainted by ideological and partisan politics, I would suggest that you review Bush v. Gore from 2000, which, as far as I was concerned, ripped any pretense of the Supreme Court not having partisan affiliations as I think, the sine qua non, to use a language that might be used in the hallowed halls of the Supreme Court. Example of that they are, in fact, partisan. Not just ideological, but partisan.
When they poured across the border, I was cautioned to surrender. This I could not do. I took my gun and
I happen to believe that every judge rules based upon their own political philosophy. But the idea of being nakedly partisan, well, Bob Edgar, president of Common Cause, said he found Justice Thomas's explanation about the omission to be implausible. As a Supreme Court justice who regularly hears complex legal cases, it's hard to see how he could have misunderstood the simple directions of a federal disclosure form. You know, here I have to say Bob Edgar is being unfair because every legal scholar will tell you that Justice Thomas is considered way over his head in hearing those complex legal cases, that he is perhaps one of the least learned, the least intellectually curious, the least accomplished of perhaps any judge who has ever sat on the Supreme Court. So I think it's perfectly plausible that he didn't know that he was breaking the law. Let's let the marketplace sort it out.
You can go to another Supreme Court.
Right. You could simply go and get a different Supreme Court justice. Deborah Rode, a law professor at Stanford University, who specializes in judicial ethics. You know, on the Supreme Court, there's almost virtually no code of ethics. Like it's recommended that you don't do things that would bring disfavor upon the Supreme Court. Now, lower courts actually have very specific things that they must recuse themselves for. But on the Supreme Court, it's really up to the judge's discretion. And, well, these people have no discretion. I mean, once you select the President of the United States, once you say, against every single ruling that we've ever made in favor of states' rights, as the uber principle that we always pay attention to. Once you cross that Rubicon and say, well, not in this instance, we need to stop the counting of the ballots in Florida because it may lead to a prejudicial notion that George Bush, this is their ruling, that if we do not stop the counting in Florida, it may be prejudicial to the notion that George Bush has won the election. That they felt that if we allowed the ballots to continue, it may give people the idea that George Bush didn't win the election. So, the notion that, I didn't disclose this, whatever. The notion that I go and speak to the Tea Party, that I go to fundraisers for right-wing causes, the notion I go hunting with Dick Cheney weeks before I rule in favor of him on the disclosure of his Energy Commission, that stuff is chump change. We chose the President of the United States. You think I'm going to feel bad about this other bullcrap? I just took a shit in your living room. And you're telling me that I should worry about not getting crumbs on your table? Don't you see? I just took a shit in your living room. You don't have a dog. That was me. I did it when you went in to get me some coffee. You said, would you like some coffee? I said, yes. You went into the kitchen. I took my pants off, and I went into the middle of your room, and I took a shit there. And then I walked over to the table, sat down, you brought me coffee and a scone, and you said, please be careful not to get crumbs on the table. Because I don't have my little sweepy thing. But are you not noticing the fact that I took a shit in your living room? Okay. Well, then guess what? I'm not too concerned about leaving crumbs on your table. Professor Rode noted, for instance, that it was still unknown who contributed a total of $550,000 to Liberty Central, the conservative legal group that Mrs. Thomas founded in 2009 in opposition to President Obama's policies. I got to guess. Do you think it was the Heritage Foundation or someone who funds the Heritage Foundation?
Surprise, surprise.
Wake up, chumps. Wake up. Unbelievable.
The things you break, some can be replaced. A simple rule, every day be sure you wake.
Heading up to my place up in Columbia County, as we are wont to do, and I received just a bunch of text messages, some that were a little bit cryptic, some that weren't. I don't really check it that much in the car unless I'm having a fight with my wife. and she's driving, and I want to ignore her and pretend like I'm doing work. And it was announced that after, at the end of Countdown, that this would be the last show for Keith Olberman. And there, I will get into this more during the post show, because, some of it's just sort of gossipy. But, and I should say that Evan, by the time Evan texted me, Evan's so the loop. My dad had already texted me. My dad already knew by the time I heard from Evan. So I should say that the long and short of it is, I do not believe this was a function of Comcast. And by that I mean, if this company was being taken over by, well, look, I think that Keith has not gotten along with management, and again, much of this is speculation. To the extent that I know anything that the public doesn't know, it's very little, and it's all essentially consistent with what with certain reports I've seen. Because I'm not in regular contact with Keith Olberman. We have no contact outside of the show, beyond my sending him a very brief email saying that I had a tremendous amount of respect and appreciation for all the work that he's done in the context of his show. That's it. But I would say hello. We would talk. How's it going? Good. Sometimes Keith would talk about Bill Hicks because he knows I come from that world a little bit, and that's it. And frankly, there wasn't, when I would go in and subbing for him over the past month, there wasn't a lot of discussion about any meta aspects of the show. Beyond, you can either sit here or there. Keith sometimes sits here, sometimes he sits there, when you're prepping. And but through other channels, I hear things. And frankly, I am trying to learn as I get older, and with only moderate success, to not articulate my opinion about things that aren't necessarily my business, don't necessarily mean anything to people outside of a narrow situation, and don't end up coming back and bite me in the ass. I think my ability to get myself in trouble is well documented. I am also not someone who has gotten along historically well with management. I don't know the management at MSNBC. I can tell you that the management at Air America, I don't believe it was appropriate for me to get along with them. But other people handled it differently and found more success in some instances than I did. But there was definitely tension between Olberman and the management at MSNBC. And I think that they have been trying to fire him, get him to leave for an extended period of time. I would say probably, my guess is, for almost a year, maybe less. But that is the sense that I have gotten. I said that when they suspended him over the campaign donations, it seemed to me to be very much like the suspension of Randy Rhoads from Air America. A suspension that was meant as much to agitate, to set a pretext, as much as it was to carry out any policy dictates.
The first cut is the deepest. Baby, I know the first cut is the deepest. 'Cause when it comes to being lucky, she's cursed.
And I think that, frankly, I think they wanted to use that as a pretext at that time, and they couldn't figure out a way to make it happen. Because whatever, Scarborough had done the same thing, because everybody thought it was ridiculous. It didn't make any sense. Now, I do think that what is problematic is the great, and I will say this. I don't know whether or not Keith wanted to leave that show, or if, to the extent that he did want to leave, it was a function of the grief he was taking from management. I don't know. I imagine it's somewhere in between. I don't know if he even knows how that breaks down. But I do think that we are going to be hearing from him shortly. I don't know, not here on this program. Evan's looking at me like, what? Were we supposed to answer a phone call? And I think that we are going to, he's going to have a presence. And I think I don't need to tell you. Look, there are some people who, would email me like, I never liked Keith anyway. Doesn't matter. Some people like him, dislike him from an entertainment perspective. Doesn't matter. I don't know. Maybe it's even so obvious it's not even worth saying. But Keith Olberman brought a progressive infrastructure, helped the progressive infrastructure, brought a message of dissent to TV where there was none before then. Donahue had a shot, the Roll Up to the War. He was a very expensive show. Yes, he got good ratings on a crappy network. Do I think part of the reason why he was taken off was because he was anti-war? Yes. The other part was it was easy to justify because he was probably making more than he was earning in terms of the ratings. But Olberman was not like that. Olberman built MSNBC, both in terms of ratings and in terms of creating a programmatic structure for them. He is responsible for Rachel Maddow being on TV in the way that she is now. It's conceivable that Rachel could have, been a contributor somewhere, but I don't see CNN giving her a show. And I don't think that MSNBC would have given her a show unless she was protected, promoted, championed as much by Keith Olbermann.
We're supposed to lay before we take the fall. We seem to capture the pain before we face the wall. I never understood the things that cause our life. Like the shadows falling down, make things right.
And O'Donnell would not have a show. And Ed Schultz would not have a show. And Cenk Uygur would not be filling in. None of that would have happened. None of it. And Chris Hayes would not be as prominent as he is. And I could go down the line in terms of people who would have a much smaller platform were it not for what Keith Olbermann did. And, we all have our parts that we play in this entire sort of movement to the extent that we have one. I don't think we quite have one yet, but an infrastructure. You know, people send me, you know, I can draw a line for you from, and I can't remember who it was, the person when I was doing Seder on Sundays who sent me an email with guest selections to Melissa Harris Lacewell, I can't remember her new name, to being on my show, to her being on Rachel's show. I can draw a direct line, and it includes Jessica. And it includes my bookers who went on to these other shows. The first time that Chris Hayes, I think, did any media was on the Majority Report. The first time Marcos did any was on the Majority Report. I'm not saying this because I'm being self-aggrandizing, because no one cares. I'm saying this because that leads to something, and then that leads to something, and so on, and so on, and so on. So the implications of Keith Olberman and what he did in those 8 years, I don't know if there was any policy implications that you could directly tie to it. We certainly didn't leave Iraq because he gave a special comment to Donald Rumsfeld. But the implications of his show will resonate. MSNBC could disappear tomorrow, and the implications of his show will resonate for years to come. And that's his importance. That's his legacy as of today. But the guy hasn't passed away. He's going to go on and do something else. And, you know, so it's a loss, but what he got in motion still exists. And, I will talk about the implications of the new lineup and all that other stuff in the post show. But that's the most important thing. That's the biggest takeaway from this in terms of Olbermann, is that the ripples that he created over the course of those 8 years, 6 years, whatever it is, will be felt for a long time going forward. And I hope he's very proud about that. I'm sure he is. And I think to a certain extent, it's as Joe Lieberman said, to everything there's a season. And I can't possibly win re-election. But Olbermann, went out on top. Dude went out with the highest rated show on that program, consistently. You add up those 2 times he repeats, unbelievable. He created what, one of the main reasons why I went into liberal talk radio. I mean, aside from my passion for politics, is I wanted to prove that you could make money as a liberal. It didn't exist in 2004. It didn't. There was nothing. Nobody. And now, it's different. It's different now. Not for me, but for others. Meanwhile, the Bush White House broke elections law.
Hey, what happened?
Surprise, surprise.
Well, you gotta be kidding me. Many of you will remember this story that Karl Rove was assembling people in government, in the executive, basically outlining a strategy of how to turn their agencies into mechanisms in which to elect more Republicans. New York Times reports yesterday the Bush White House, yesterday or today? yesterday, the Bush White House, particularly before the 2006 midterm elections, but frankly the entire time you're in office, it's routine. In other words, it happens like in the same way that you would get coffee in the morning. Wow, that's surprising you have coffee. No, that's my routine. Every morning I go and I brew a cup of coffee and I get it on the way to after I brush my teeth or before I brush my teeth, or I get coffee at the Dunkin' Donuts on the way to work. That's my routine. The Bush White House routinely violated a federal law. In other words, by violated, they mean broke a federal law. In other words, performed a criminal act that prohibits the use of federal tax dollars to pay for political activities by creating a political boiler room that coordinated Republican campaign activities nationwide, a report issued Monday by an independent federal agency. So they routinely performed criminal acts, breaking the Hatch Act, the law that says federal employees cannot engage in political campaigning while they're on the federal dime, I guess. The report of the Office of Special Counsel finds that the Bush administration's Office of Political Affairs, overseen by Karl Rove, served almost as an extension of the Republican National Committee. Because to serve as an extension of the Republican National Committee, the name of the office would not be Office of Political Affairs. It would be called Extension of the Republican National Committee. And because they never did that, it was only almost as an extension of the Republican National Committee. Developing a target list of congressional races, organizing dozens of briefings for political appointees to press them for work for party candidates, and sending cabinet officials out to help these campaigns. The report based on about 100 pages of documents and interviews with 80 Bush administration officials, took more than 3 years, documented how these political activities accelerated before the 2006 election. This included helping coordinate fundraising by Republican candidates and pressing Bush administration political appointees to help with Republican voter turnout pitches. If you've been appointed to the FDA, what can the FDA do to help Republicans win? Or the EPA, or any other agency that can be used strictly for political purposes. The Office of Special Counsel, a relatively obscure federal agency, is charged with enforcing the Hatch Act, a 1939 law that prohibits federal employees from engaging in partisan political activity. Certain members of the White House political staff, including top aides at the office, are exempt, but the law still prohibits the use of federal money, even by these officials, to support political causes. The report found that during the Bush administration, senior staff members at the Office of Political Affairs, such as Karl Rove, for instance, violated the Hatch Act by organizing 75 political briefings from 2001 to 2007. So that would be 75 violations right there of the Hatch Act. The investigators also found evidence that the Bush White House improperly classified travel by senior officials as official government business when it was, in fact, political. And the costs associated with the travel were never reimbursed. In other words, tax dollars were misappropriated. You could say embezzled. A spokesman for the Office of Special Counsel said Monday, and this is the coup de grace, folks, because remember, in this administration, a spokesman for the Office of Special Counsel said Monday that because the administration officials had left office, it no longer has jurisdiction to file any charges. That's right, folks. Don't look back. Let's turn the page. It also said that it has not made a formal referral to the Justice Department to ask it to pursue any possible charges. And a Justice Department official on Monday declined to comment when asked if it might file charges based on the report. Of course they won't. Of course they won't. Turn the page, folks. Turn the page. I'll tell you something. If you wanted to go on, if you wanted to rob a bank, you just go in, you tell the judge, I robbed the bank in the past. Can't we let the past be the past? I mean, why are we wasting all these judicial resources on not helping the American people? The FDIC will insure the bank. The bank has insurance. GDP goes up. They're going to hire more security. They got to replace the safe I blew up. Let's just turn the page, Judge. Let's just start with clip number 2 from Michelle Bachman, the future of the Republican Party.
I want to thank the Tea Party Express and Tea Party HD for inviting me to speak this evening. I'm here at their request and not to compete with the official Republican remarks. The Tea Party is a dynamic force for good in our national conversation, and it's an honor for me to speak with you.
So, understand what happened last night. I don't know if you saw this, but if you, and gosh, you know, I watched the speech, but I did not hear the speech. And that's not because I had it on mute, because I was so astonished by what I saw. This was so fantastic. So Paul Ryan, this guy who has a farcical economic program, which calls for privatizing Social Security, privatizing Medicare, cuts that are impossible to make and won't be made with budget numbers that don't add up. And I think I had an argument with, well, it's not Name Drop Friday, but I don't think he's a name. Raheem Salon, what's that guy's name? The conservative, I don't know, on Parker Spitzer once. And we were coming off, and I was talking about Ryan's numbers are a joke. They don't measure up. And he's like, well, he's agreed that if his numbers don't measure up, he will raise taxes up to 16.9% of GDP, which, of course, is the, and it may not be 16.9%. It's pretty close, which is the magic number that the Cato Institute had. A guy named, what was that guy's name? I have it.
It's up there.
Yes, I know. I have it up on the wall there, that Cato report. But essentially, he was the former head of the Cato Institute and had realized that starve the beast doesn't work. When you cut taxes below a certain percentage of GDP, you actually get more government spending because constituents think they're getting it on the cheap. They don't think they're paying for it. They're putting on a credit card. You know, that's why people tend to spend more if they have a credit card because they don't have to pay for it right away. And so basically what this guy was saying to me was that, yeah, Ryan's numbers are all a joke, but he'll raise taxes if he has to get up to the point what we need. Well, yeah, of course. That's quite a short circuit you got going there. In other words, we're going to sell the American public a bill of goods, and then we'll raise taxes on them anyway.
I'm sort of like a lion's cage, such a cautious display.
gave the official rebuttal, which guess who's not going to be president ever? Paul Ryan. They're going to have to do a lot of work on him to get him to the point where people trust this guy. But what was really astonishing is that CNN decided to carry Michelle Bachman's speech ostensibly to, what was it, Tea Party Nation? Tea Party HD.
Tea Party
HD, high definition. I'm not sure what it is. Tea Party Express. Who knows how these franchises work. And CNN decided to carry this alt rebuttal, which some people found quite controversial because the only reason why they did is because they have paired up with Tea Party HD or whatever it is to sponsor a Republican debate. So they were trying to give legitimacy to this organization. I think in the end it really, really ended up hurting the Republicans because it split their message. It makes them look non-unified. And they also let perhaps the craziest elected member of their entire caucus. I was going to say the stupidest, but that's a tough competition. I think Bachman could be the craziest. And, here's a little tip. When you're doing a two-camera shoot, well, let me rephrase this. Well, I should say this. Michelle Bachman spent the entire time on her rebuttal that was broadcast on CNN talking into the wrong camera. Do you understand what I'm saying? There was some moron didn't realize, wait, we should share the feed. So they had two cameras. One of the cameras had a teleprompter. How many times have we heard the Republicans talk about Obama's nothing without his teleprompter? Guess what? You ain't going to hear much of that anymore. Because she was looking into the teleprompter and the camera that was meant for the Tea Party HD. But the one that most Americans were watching was just off to her right. And so it was as if you were watching a behind-the-scenes feed. Like, hey, we're doing a documentary on Michelle Bachman. This is when she was giving that speech. Except for nobody told you that this is when she was giving that speech. You thought that she was giving the speech to you. Except for she was looking about 12 to 18 inches off screen.
I've been waiting for this moment all my life. But it's not quite right. It's impossible, if possible, that whose blind word so clear but so unheard.
It was the strangest thing I've ever seen, and I couldn't follow any of it, and God forgive me, I wasn't going to go back and listen to it. But this part got some wowzas from people.
And I believe that America is the indispensable nation of the world. Just the creation of this nation itself was a miracle.
Hold on, pause it for 1 second.
See a miracle again.
Pause it for 1 second. The indispensable nation of the world? I don't even know what that means.
We're too big to fail, I think.
To appear sad with the same old and lazy eye, vexed to rest on you. If we were so.
All right, let's play it from the beginning. Turn it up a little bit.
And I believe that America is the indispensable nation of the world.
The nation.
Just the creation of this nation itself was a miracle. Who can say that we won't see a miracle again? The perilous battle that was fought during World War II in the Pacific at Iwo Jima was a battle against all odds. And yet this picture immortalizes the victory of young GIs.
Stop it. Go back. Go back. Go back. This is when somebody, where she's like noticing people behind the camera, you know, and it's hard to talk into a teleprompter. It is. I had very much difficulty. One of the shows I did for Olberman, I could hear like the director talking in the ear of the AD, and it was distracting. I imagine that when it got to the words Iwo Jima, or what is it, Iwo Jima, Iwo Jima, that's the moment where people are realizing, oh my God, she's looking into the wrong camera.
I've been waiting for this moment.
And so they're running back and forth in her eye line, and she's trying to focus. And okay, just go back just a little because I want to hear her say those words again.
That was fought during World War II in the Pacific at Iwo Jima was a battle against all odds. And yet this picture immortalizes the victory of young GIs over the incursion against the Japanese.
Over the
These
incursion?
6 young men raising the flag came to symbolize all of America coming together to beat back a totalitarian aggressor. Our current debt crisis we face today is different, but we still need all of us to pull together. But we can do this. That's our hope. We will push forward. We will proclaim liberty throughout the land, and we will do so because we, the people, will never give up on this great nation.
This just in, Michelle Bachman, bat shit crazy. Folks, let me tell you something. Those brave young GIs, when they put that flag up at Umajamuma, except for the Indian guy. Don't think about that guy. Isaac Hayes. A drinking problem. Don't think about him. When they fought the incursion of that totalitarian Japanese peoples, it was really important.
I'm a poor boy born a rut. Some say my manners ain't the best. Some of my friends have been in a whole lot of trouble, and some say I'm no better than the rest. But tell your mama and your papa, sometimes good guys don't wear white.
On the phone, Alex Perrine of Salon.com. Welcome to the program, Alex.
Hi, thank you.
Let's play a clip of Michelle Bachman, which you cite on your post. You may not be able to hear it, but it's 39 seconds long, and you know it. But let's play that right now.
Now, because of this underlying bill, the federal government will virtually have control over every aspect of lives for the American people. It is time to stand up and say, we get to choose. We choose liberty or we choose tyranny. It's one of the two. The underlying bill represents the tyranny and the intervention of the federal government. Mr. Forbes' amendment represents liberty for the American people. It's our choice. What will we choose today? Will we choose liberty or will we choose tyranny? I choose Mr. Forbes' amendment. I yield
Gentleman,
back.
time is expired.
So she's sitting there talking about, well, I mean, we didn't actually say it, but one would think that she's sitting there talking about the idea that we're rounding up people and putting them in concentration camps. But in fact, what she's talking about is the climate change bill. And she's saying we have to choose between liberty and tyranny. And that's
right.
a pretty stark choice, isn't it?
Yes, for a bill to tax carbon emissions, or not even to tax them, but and then she's using the language of Thomas Jefferson literally calling for an armed violent insurrection against an oppressor. I mean, that's the language she's using. For what is a basically pretty bog standard bit of liberal domestic policy.
And, the interesting thing is that I felt that the Bush administration was illegitimately chosen to be as president. I mean, frankly.
Right. I mean,
look, we can debate as to whether or not. I mean, I think you and I would agree on this perspective. But the point is that I don't think I ever heard anybody who agreed with that assessment that the Supreme Court was inappropriate in stopping the count in Florida, who started referring this to as tyranny and liberty, and we must revert to talking about Jefferson and the blood of patriots must run. I mean, I heard none of that type of rhetoric.
No, I mean, and you'll get conservatives every now and then who try to say, the left is just as bad, and their examples are always like answer socialist protesters that they saw one time at a rally. It's not like it's prominent elected officials. It's not a member of Congress. The worst that the liberal rhetoric ever got was just on a very limited extreme, and it just was nowhere near as pervasive. And that was in response to an administration that many liberals did think, for good reason, was illegitimately picked.
Absolutely, and I've never even heard any, frankly, elected Democratic elected officials ever in any way condone that type of talk.
No, never. I mean, they never would come close to condoning it.
John Bonaire, just the other day, said it was not his responsibility to tell birthers in his own caucus in the House that what they think is wrong. I mean, it's rather astonishing.
It is.
Now, with that said, okay, well, we agree with that. But tell us the story of. I had not seen this quote, or maybe I had, but not so specifically. You have a great quote in your piece from Eric Erickson, who is a commentator, a paid commentator on CNN. Retell that story for us.
Oh yeah, Eric Erickson. He's a Red State blogger. One of them, and Red State's one of the most biggest of the Republican blogs. Very mainstream Republican, and obviously he's also now a paid political analyst for CNN. And he just got very upset a couple years ago to learn that in Washington State they were going to ban dish detergent with phosphates because it was polluting water, and so people had to switch to a different brand of dish detergent. And
I got to tell you, it is upsetting. Sometimes it leaves a little bit of a film. Sometimes you have to almost wash your dishes twice. Okay.
Yeah, no, I know. Yeah, you might have to rinse them off after you wash them. It can be annoying.
It can definitely be annoying. So his response to this was.
His response was he went on his blog, and he never took this post down. This post is still live on Red State. And he literally said, at what point do they get off the couch, march down to their state legislator's house, pull him outside, and beat him to a bloody pulp for being an idiot? That's a quote, the entire beating him to a bloody pulp thing. And that, he at what point, and it was not necessarily a call for people to do that. He was just wondering when it's going to happen. He feels it's inevitable that people will become so upset they will begin beating their state legislators to a bloody pulp. And a couple paragraphs later, he says, "Were I in Washington State, I'd be cleaning my gun about now."
Civilization's crying, and I won't try to deny it. We got a problem, son. Something's gotta be done. For the Pope and the President and the big rock.
And this once again in response to a ban on dish detergent.
And so, I mean, it's funny, except of course we have seen the end product of. I mean, I don't know if you can draw a direct line here, but like you say, this stuff is in the ether. They are promoting this to people who are certainly riled up and have been told essentially by their elected leaders that this type of rhetoric is perfectly appropriate. Not only do you not pay a price for this, and let me ask you this: to what extent? I don't know if you read the Matt Bai piece in the New York Times the other day in response to this, creating an equivalency between a diarist on the Daily Kos who said that Giffords is dead to me because she took a vote I don't like, and the rhetoric coming from people like Sarah Palin. Give me your sense of what the implications are of the mainstream media creating this equivalency.
Well, they sort of need it. I mean, they really, the sort of supposedly objective media really, like, sort of desperately needs for their own sense of self-worth to preserve the idea that there are two extremes that they are straddling right the middle of. So I can understand why he would do that, but it's like classic, like, nut picking. It really is just like almost like you can feel like a desperate search went out to find some liberal who said something that could be construed as sounding violent about this, because that's not even a statement of violence, really. She's dead to me is a fairly common expression that does not, but whatever. And I'm not necessarily against heated rhetoric. I engage in the name calling and hyperbole and exaggeration, and it's really like there's not a explicit campaign on the left to delegitimize the entire idea of federal governance, and there's just not, and there never has been. And you can go around looking for isolated pieces of over-the-top rhetoric, but that does not, like, those isolated bits do not make up this entire years-long campaign on the right, which has been, organized and coming from all levels, from the top to the bottom.
But let me ask you this. Now, what are the implications? I mean, there's a lot of calls now for civility and for these establishment media voices looking for unity. But, I mean, to what extent does the fact that Matt Bai writes this piece, now, of course, he has his agenda, which is to become, the next David Broder or something and seem somehow above the fray in some way. But to what extent are responses like that from the mainstream media actually in some way giving tacit approval, or at the very least not providing the proper disincentive for this type of language, if they are willing to create this false equivalency and not really call out the culprits here?
Well, it totally does. I mean, while they spend a lot of time touting and saying, oh, if only we could all be more civil and polite, like, what it actually does in effect is say, like, no matter how extreme you get, like, no matter how extreme and how over the top and how insane you get, we will never find it more insane and over the top than the other side. So there's no disincentive whatsoever for making your rhetoric as over the top as possible, because the supposed watchdogs, the supposed, grown-ups in charge are just going to say, they're going to be like, oh, those kids are at it again. But they're not ever going to say, like, wow, that side is just taking it to a huge extreme that the supposed other side doesn't. Because the mainstream media, as I said, they are, no matter how over the top the other side gets, they're just going to say, well, both sides do it. What can you do?
Exactly. All right. Well, Alex Perrine, thank you very much for your time.